pleasure to be here with you this afternoon. As was just mentioned, I am Brett Steele, Senior Director of Preventing Targeted Violence at the McCain Institute. And our mission on our team is to foster innovation, convene practitioners, and facilitate knowledge sharing to perform that essential role in any democracy. Help citizens feel safe and secure, whether that be from school shootings, which we've seen so very many of recently, hate crimes, terrorism, any form of mass casualty violence. We take a serious role at the Institute in preventing all forms of mass casualty violence. We do this in 3 ways. 1, we foster innovation through the Invent to Prevent program with our partners, Adventure Partners, and Credence Management Solutions. This is a national competition of high schools and universities where students take an entire semester and an operating budget of up to $2,000 to design innovative tools to prevent targeted violence or terrorism. They come up with everything from board games to video games to teacher curriculum, podcasts, anything you can think of. Next, we've built the Prevention Practitioners Network. This is a network of over 1,000 interdisciplinary professionals dedicated to preventing targeted violence and terrorism. And that network created the first of its kind directory of psychologists, social workers, psychiatrists, school counselors, anyone in a position to intervene with a youth that may be at risk of committing an act of violence and get them the support they need before they turn violent. Just 2 weeks ago, we heard from a parent who turned to our directory when his son was growing increasingly violent in his rhetoric and was able to connect with a provider in our directory, and he really thinks he potentially prevented an act of violence in that connection. Finally, we have our Screen Hate campaign. That's so that parents, just like that parent who reached out a couple weeks ago, they can, if they're concerned about their children, any youth they know, they can find resources in their region to get youth the support they need so that we reduce acts of violence. So that's our role in keeping communities safe and secure and fostering democracy through that work. This afternoon, we're here to hear from Governor Katie Hobbs, the governor of this fine state of Arizona. And we're enjoying the beauty of that state here today with perfect weather. And Major Garrett. He is the senior Washington correspondent for CBS News and co-author of a book, The Big Truth. And I will turn it over to Major Garrett to kick off this discussion.
Great, Brett. Thank you so very much. It's great to be with you. On behalf of all my CBS colleagues, it's our honor and privilege to be a participant with the McCain Institute and the Sedona Forum. As someone who grew up in San Diego, California, and spent a lot of his youth in Arizona, it's always great to be back here. It's a wonderful state. I'm very happy to be here. This interview will be also part of my podcast called The Takeout. In its 7th year, politics, policy, a little bit of pop culture every week on all your best podcast platforms, 75 radio stations around the country, Sirius XM POTUS Channel 124, and our CBS News streaming service. So without further ado, Governor Hobbs, it's great to see you. A round of applause for the governor, please.
Thank you.
So, Governor, we'll start with some big national issues, and then we'll talk about Arizona issues, if that's okay with you.
Yep.
Flying in from Washington, I can tell you there is a rather large freak-out factor about the scheduled end of Title 42 next week. And I want to read to you, as we start this conversation on immigration, an excerpt from a memo the Biden White House sent around today. It reads as follows. It's a direct quote. The Biden administration has a comprehensive, multi-agency, multi-country plan to manage the border. True, not true?
Well, I can tell you here in Arizona, we are very focused on the fallout from the ending of Title 42. And I think, to be honest, we've been working on our own plan because there's a lot of frustration across the board that Washington isn't doing enough and taking this seriously enough. The impact it's going to have on these small border communities in a state like Arizona. So we're making sure that we're coordinating with our emergency management folks, our Department of Homeland Security folks in Arizona to provide the support that these communities need with their NGOs providing humanitarian relief and in law enforcement support as well.
What are your biggest anxieties looking toward next week? And operationally, what is your tempo day to day preparing for them?
We are on the phone daily coordinating with law enforcement, with these emergency management agencies to make sure that we have the pieces in place that we need. And our biggest concern really is the influx of folks and not having the capacity to deal with them.
Mm-hmm. Right now, it feels like the increase in the number of crossings is predominantly in Texas. Mm-hmm. The 1,500 military troops that are being sent for administrative purposes, backup, they're not going to be in frontline positions, primarily going to Texas. But I don't need to tell you as a border state governor, whenever there is efforts directed one place, the flow moves elsewhere. Mm-hmm. So obviously you have a heightened anxiety about things moving to Arizona.
Yeah, absolutely we do. And an example, the federal government has the CBP One app. The only port of entry you can use that at in Arizona is Nogales. And so there's all these other places people can enter, but they can only use the app, which is supposed to streamline and make things more orderly at this one port of entry. So it's a challenge. I am confident in our preparedness to meet this challenge, but we're doing this largely without support from the federal government.
Should Title 42 be lifted?
Well, I mean, it's not an immigration policy, it's a healthcare policy.
It's a public health policy.
Yeah, and with the lifting of the public health emergency, I think it makes sense that it goes away. I wish there had been more planning and preparation for it to go away.
Have you talked to the president about this directly?
Yes.
How recently?
In the last few weeks.
How about the vice president?
I have not spoken with the vice president.
Would you like to be engaging with them more? Would you like them to be more curious about what you're seeing and what you're having to deal with?
We knew this was a priority day one, and we started engaging with the White House on day one of my administration. We got the Secretary of Homeland Security to come out to Arizona to see firsthand what our agencies were worried about dealing with. And so I think we've got that. We've given them the message, and we would like them to act more urgently on the message.
Can you define what acting more urgently would look like to you?
Really providing the resources that we need. There is additional emergency shelter dollars. We don't know when those are going to be deployed. Folks are going to have to provide the services and get reimbursed. That's a problem. And we've been sounding the alarm about Title 42 being lifted for months, not just since I took office.
Do you have any opinion on Senator Sinema's legislation just introduced yesterday to extend it for 2 years?
I wasn't aware of her legislation. I know she's doing a lot to help make sure that we have the things in place that we need, and I appreciate her support on this. So I think the federal government is unprepared for the lifting of this policy.
Unprepared, okay. Let me move on to the economy. There are conversations in New York, Washington, around the country about headwinds, and there is anxiety about regional banks, whether it's justified or unjustified. Do you have any concern as a governor in the West of regional bank solvency in Arizona or generally in the greater western part of the United States?
I recently held a roundtable with bank industry leaders in Arizona. They're concerned. We're talking with them about what we can do to make sure that there's solvency, and we're continuing to work with them.
Would you say that you are more concerned than you were 2 or 3 months ago on this particular topic?
No, I'm actually less concerned.
Because?
I think they're in better shape than there was a rush on one bank, and that kind of passed, and I think they're not feeling as anxious as folks are in other places.
Interesting. What would you say is your general feeling about the likelihood or lack of likelihood of a recession Q3, Q4, as President Biden heads into his full-blown re-election campaign?
I think that the economists are more optimistic than folks on the ground. That's what I'm hearing.
Okay, and does that translate to your optimism, net-net?
No, I think the folks on the ground are less optimistic than the economists, and so...
That tells you what?
That a recession is more likely than the economists are projecting.
Got it, okay. And what has been your experience and what are your priorities here in Arizona with semiconductors, the CHIPS Act, and as the Biden administration works through a rather extensive, and some have said onerous regulatory regime to qualify? What's your experience? What are your asks?
Well, in Arizona, we are benefiting greatly from the CHIPS Act. We have right now the largest CHIPS Act investment in the country with TSMC, and that is bringing with it an entire ecosystem of the supply chain needed to manufacture chips in Arizona. And we're working to build that by building workforce, and continuing to work to bring these companies to Arizona so that the supply chain for chips manufacturing is there. I know there's some regulatory burden that folks are trying to work through. We're doing what we can with our Commerce Authority to help with that. But the CHIPS Act has been a boon for Arizona, and I think will continue to be.
What will things look differently in 3 years? How will they look differently because of that and because of this reset?
So TSMC is still under construction. They haven't opened yet. We also have Intel, which is building a new fab. And so the amount of jobs available, high-tech, good-paying jobs that don't need a college degree is exploding. And that is great for Arizonans. We have to get our housing, workforce housing, to catch up with that. And we are working to get the workforce pipeline up to par of what we need to get folks into these jobs and to continue to build this ecosystem.
How excited are you about a Biden re-election campaign?
As the newly elected governor of Arizona, I'm very focused on Arizona, and that's, I haven't weighed in on the presidential election yet. I think that that things like the CHIPS Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, which President Biden ushered into law, are great for Arizona, and I'm excited about the kinds of things that he's delivering on to help build the middle class and grow the economy in our state.
So you just went through the election. Would you say that President Biden's prospects in Arizona are better than they were in 2020 or worse?
Well, as someone who ran against a candidate who was largely focused on the false allegations about the 2020 election, I can tell you that Arizonans are tired of that rhetoric. And right now it seems like some of the candidates on the other side, that's what they're continuing to run on. And so I think it really depends on who the Republican nominee is in terms of what the prospects are for the president's reelection in Arizona.
Do you have a general assessment on the Republican field as it is currently constructed?
I have seen polling on Trump and DeSantis, and Trump looks far ahead in Arizona. So that's
where things are.
Yeah.
Currently. Let me ask you about Kari Lake, as you mentioned her obliquely there.
Who?
Two things about Kari Lake I'd like to ask you about. First of all, this headline might have been one that your staff put in front of you late yesterday afternoon. Her attorneys were fined $2,000 for submitting incorrect submissions to the court in challenging your election victory. I also read recently that she is not in favor of a recall effort against you. Would you evaluate those two things? You can take them separately, one at a time.
I mean, as someone who has not personally, but had to pay a lot of legal fees for her continued election challenges, that are still ongoing in the court. I applaud the courts for issuing sanctions. They should be a lot more than $2,000, because I can tell you she's raised a lot more than $2,000 off her legal challenge.
Talk to me about that incentive structure, because it's one of the things I worry about in this space, that the downside risks are so low and the upside gains are so demonstrably high in terms of social media awareness, fundraising, and visibility.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that's, I think, right now what you're seeing from her operation is a fundraising operation. Whether that's teasing that she's going to run for Senate, teasing that she's going to run for whatever she's going to do, and she just keeps raising money off of it.
There was an allegation, and this is what the attorneys were fined over, an assertion that 36,000 ballots were fed into the system. No evidence of that. That's what they were sanctioned for. However, the signature verification part of the challenge remains unresolved. Do you have any doubt at all about what will play out in that place, or anything that Arizona needs to do to clarify or improve that process?
We have been doing vote by mail successfully, securely for decades in Arizona, and our processes are sound. And I don't think there is question about the signature verification process that's utilized. This is something that folks like Carrie Lake and others continue to hound on, again, with no evidence, to say that the process is flawed. It is not. And the claim that's still active, I believe, was reverted back to the trial court for on the basis of the ruling, not the actual substance of the claim.
And you have no doubt in your mind that that will be resolved favorably in your direction?
Yes.
You don't? Okay.
No, I don't have any doubts.
Understood.
It is not a valid claim.
It's not a valid
Yes.
claim. Okay. Can we talk about tamales?
Sure.
Good. I'm glad you said yes. You know where I'm going. Bill passed, you vetoed it. Your allies upheld the veto. Where do things stand? How prepared are you to compromise to find a resolution?
We are absolutely ready to engage. In fact, we already have been engaging our Department of Health that had the main concerns about the bill, which the sponsor was not willing to listen to. I'm hopeful that we can come to some compromise and get something through this session that will, our focus is balancing the ability for these small businesses to grow and the public health and safety of Arizonans.
If you could state in this clearest form as you can what your public health concerns are about this particular long-standing, kind of, as I've read about it, deeply embedded small business, micro business part of Arizona's economy. What are you concerned about? What are you afraid of?
Well, I think it's really just the level of the ability to I don't want to say regulate, but ensure that these foods that have more risk are being prepared in places that risk is minimized.
What does that look like? When you talk about compromise and engaging, what are your priorities?
Well, our Department of Health was concerned about the licensing, or not the licensing structure, but the structure for registration of these businesses, and having no ability to, which would maybe provide some assurance to the public that there was some minimum safety standards, and there really wasn't, and that was the concern. So that's what we're trying to work through right now.
So minimum safety standards, if you can resolve that, you think this can get pushed through this legislative session?
I'm hopeful. I think there's vehicle bills that can be utilized to make this happen.
Would you just define that as one of your top goals?
Absolutely. I think it's unfortunate that that our concerns weren't addressed earlier in the process, and we're working to bring the stakeholders together to make sure this happens this session.
As kind of evaluating why things didn't get resolved on the front end, do you think that was a political test of your new governorship? Do you think that was a lack of engagement on your part? Have you reassessed anything about why this sort of got off the tracks?
I mean, we've certainly looked at where we could have done better and adjusted our process in terms of engaging on legislation.
Okay. The New York Times said that tamales, and I'm quoting here, hold a special Proustian place in Arizona's culinary soul. Is that true?
Absolutely, and I'll tell you, I don't think anyone in Arizona has been arrested for selling tamales. So we're not going after tamale vendors.
There'll be no arrests of tamale vendors.
No.
Very good. So since we're on the topic, I think these are really important questions for you personally.
Yeah.
In the mansion or at home, lard or no lard?
We have no mansion in Arizona.
Okay. Lard or no lard in the preparation?
Oh, absolutely, lard.
Okay. Sweet, elote corn or masa?
Masa.
Okay. Banana leaves or corn husk?
Corn husk.
Okay. Just checking, folks, just checking. Due diligence, that's all this is about.
I'm a native Arizonan.
Exactly, exactly. Let me talk to you about something that I imagine from your office you can see. Homeless encampments in downtown Phoenix. As I read the data, 13,500 people experiencing homelessness in Arizona. That's the 8th largest total in the United States, 2% of the national total. 29% roughly are in shelters. What are you doing, and how concerned are you about the rise in those experiencing homelessness since the pandemic and continuously?
Well, we've seen an exponential increase in unhoused individuals in Arizona over the last several years. The pandemic certainly exacerbated that, and particularly in populations that didn't previously experience homelessness, older individuals on fixed incomes who are being priced out of their rents. So it's a huge issue, and not one that the state has engaged very vigorously on. Prior to my administration, as a social worker, it's a top priority for me. And it's largely a problem that's concentrated in Phoenix right now. I just got off the phone with the mayor before I came here talking about ways that we can repurpose potentially empty state buildings or land because the city right now is under a court order to vacate these encampments that are around downtown. And so, you brought up Title 42, and one of my biggest concerns is that we're looking for these facilities to use for all kinds of purposes, and it's all kind of converging at the same time. And so it's a problem, one that we're taking seriously. You'll see significant investment in homeless resources in the budget. I'm knocking on wood, we're close on that. Homelessness is a housing problem, and we don't have enough housing. We need to build more, and there's some regulatory reform that can happen as well that I think is moving through the legislature right now too.
You might be the only, or certainly one of the very few governors who have an academic background in social work, bachelor and master's.
The very first social worker elected governor in the country.
There you go. I thought I might have been on the track there. That's theoretical study. You're now dealing with this at a very practical level. There are limitations of what states can do. There are municipal ordinances. There are county rules and regulations. Just as not only as a thought experiment, but as a governing experiment, what are you learning that was different than the theory you studied, and how is that working through your approach to this issue?
Well, I would argue that social work is much more practical than theoretical in study, and it's largely about solving problems, whether that's with individuals, families, communities, or as a policymaker. It's largely what drove me to run for office, because I saw a way to bring people together at a bigger table to solve these problems in a more systemic way than working with individuals. And that's really the core of what social work is solving problems. And so it's really going to require all the stakeholders coming together, housing providers, municipalities, counties, and really figuring out what we can do together in a way that hasn't been done before.
Will it require more persistent state involvement? I'm thinking of Governor Gavin Newsom, who put through the legislature in California an enormous amount for homeless aid. But he required of municipalities specific plans, and when the mayor submitted their first draft, he rejected every single one of them. Meaning the governor is now going to be deeply involved in your business, in your city, how you deal with it. Do you consider that a model, an inspiration, or something you want to be a little bit maybe less aggressive about?
I think Governor Newsom has done great things around homelessness, and certainly there's some pages we can take out of his playbook. I think that I have a track record of working cooperatively with cities during my time in the legislature, and so there's a balance there. And you know, a lot of cities don't necessarily feel like they need to do a lot because all the folks are moving to Phoenix. And so, so it's really finding that balance of cooperation and where we can use our resources to just find the best ways to solve this problem.
And is one of the best ways to solve the problem to increase the population in shelters above that 29% threshold that it currently is at?
I mean, our shelters are at capacity.
Right.
Emergency shelter is not the answer to homelessness.
Interesting. All right. Back to politics for just 1 second, because on the campaign trail in the Republican field, Nikki Haley has said not once, not twice, many times, a vote for President Biden in 2024 is a vote for President Harris. Do you believe that?
No.
Please continue.
I mean, I don't know where she's coming from with that, but Biden and Harris are an administration, and right now they're delivering for the people of America. And so, I think Biden's the president, and I really don't know where Haley's going with that. So, not sure how to answer, but.
I think one of the implications is he's not going to survive his second term.
Oh, I mean, he's probably more robust than I am in terms of his stamina. So
I'm going to call the president and let him know
Yeah,
you said
I mean,
that. He'll be really happy to hear you say that.
I don't know. Did you see him at the correspondence dinner? He was pretty funny.
I was near the front row, so
All
yes,
right,
I did
yes,
see him.
yeah.
See him there. On to technology. I have some questions about technology for you. What is your attitude in Arizona about the utility of and the future use of TikTok?
Well, I've issued an executive order banning TikTok from government devices because of the security concerns.
But everyone knows in the tech sector and in politics, everyone talks about this in Washington, that is, and it's almost unfair to even call it a Band-Aid because it really doesn't address the issue. Mm-hmm. Yes, state devices, but everyone who works for you, with all due respect, Governor, has a separate device. They very well may use it. So what is your larger, big picture concern about TikTok? Do you want it banned federally? Do you think we should eliminate it in this country? What do you want to tell some number of, I don't know, there's 150 million users in America. There's some number of them here in Arizona. Why they shouldn't be using it?
I mean, that's a hypothetical to me in terms of a federal ban. I don't know what's.
There's legislative efforts to do that.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, so that's up to Congress if that happens, and the president if he signs a bill that comes to him. But I can tell you that we're acting on our concerns in Arizona. The University of Arizona. ASU has banned it as well. I'm sure we'll see other government entities following that.
Artificial intelligence, are you all in or deeply skeptical / wary?
Is there a middle?
Fill in the middle.
Yeah.
Define it for me. What is your middle ground? What is your sense of artificial intelligence? There's a tremendous amount of money running toward it. Many states want to get involved in that process, want to invite people in. But there are not only internal, meaning people who have worked on this technology, concerns about what it's going to do, what it might create, the things that might be uncontrollable about artificial intelligence. And I know we're all early in this, but
Yeah.
what's your sense of it?
Well, I mean, that's the thing. It's early, and there are all these concerns. We don't know what we don't know, and I think we have to take it in stride and not just fully embrace it without considering all of the implications that it brings.
Is there anything in particular that worries you about artificial intelligence?
I mean, there's lots of sci-fi movies that could actually come true. So,
well, and back to where we were introduced in the conversation before that, deep fakes, disinformation, misinformation, artificial intelligence, as I've read, can both be an accelerator and a means of either rapidly debunking or alternately proving it's false instantly.
Yeah.
Do you think it's a net positive or a net negative in that space?
I think a negative in that space.
You do,
sure.
okay. Have you used ChatGPT
No.
for any drafts of any of your speeches?
No.
Will you?
No.
Okay. The reason I ask is I was up in Denver recently and I talked to a colleague of yours, Jared Polis, fellow governor. He said, yeah, I've used it 2 or 3 times. It's not a bad start. He's a tech guy. He's kind of into it. He wasn't nervous about it, and he didn't think it was evidence of him not working hard or doing something. He was sort of inclined to try it on the first draft and then refine it. He said it really wasn't my voice, but I got a lot of the basics down. But you're not going to do that.
I have not considered that, no.
Okay, very good, very good. You mentioned the infrastructure bill, now a law. What have you seen in Arizona? What can you point to? And do you think you should be able to, would you tell the administration, I should be able to point to things faster?
Well, we are seeing tremendous growth in infrastructure. The infrastructure law is going to help with that tremendously. Senator Sinema was just here. She was a huge part of getting that across the finish line. She's working every day to make sure that that law is delivering for Arizonans. We have major transportation infrastructure that we're focused on right now that law is going to help ensure it gets done. Broadband, connecting Arizonans across the state at 100% is a goal of my administration. It's going to help with that. Do I wish things were faster? Yes. Government always comes with bureaucracy. Things take time. We're going to do everything we can to make it happen as fast as possible.
Something that's very much a part of your effort to, and help me out on this, because I've talked to some friends and they said there's this new committee in the legislature that's sort of gumming up or slowing down the confirmation process for nominees to your cabinet.
Yep.
How big a problem is that? What are you doing to resolve it? And how frustrating or difficult has this been for you as governor?
Let me just say, this is an unprecedented level of government obstruction, and people have told us as much that this is the intent. A lot of my
to stop
nominees,
you in your tracks,
yeah,
in other words.
Yeah, nominees that require Senate confirmation are less likely to take really bold action that furthers my agenda if they think it might hamper their confirmation, and it's a problem. Nominees can serve for up to a year without confirmation. As soon as we get a budget done, the legislature is going to adjourn, and they've confirmed 3 state agency directors. We have like 36 more to go. This is a problem.
How do you resolve it?
Well, we are working with our nominees are moving forward and meeting with senators, garnering support. We're prepping them for the really contentious hearings that are also unprecedented. And we're figuring out our options if they serve their year without confirmation. We have options. I don't necessarily want to lay them all out, but we're going to be able to move forward with or without confirmation.
How does this affect your overall relationship with the legislature? And you talked about the budget. That's got to get done. Mm-hmm. It's an imperative. Where do things stand?
I would say that during my time in the legislature as Secretary of State, now as governor, I've been pretty successful at being able to focus on one thing at a time while dealing with multiple things. I've always been able to put partisan politics aside and get something done when it has to get done. We are having incredibly productive meetings with the Senate President, with the Speaker of the House, and we are very close to a budget deal. And that being said, those 2 folks are some of my biggest critics in the public. Their members got up and walked out of my State of the State address. That has never happened. Nobody is reprimanded for doing that. But you put the crap aside and do what you have to do, and we're working on a budget. I think there's other places we can do that, and I'm going to continue to try to do that. The overall relationship might not be great, but we're getting things done, and I think that lays the groundwork for moving forward on other things.
I want to ask you about election denialism, because Arizona is, if not the epicenter of this particular phenomenon in our country, very close to the epicenter. The day after the Super Bowl, I flew here and participated in an event sponsored by the Cronkite School at Arizona State University in collaboration with University of Southern California, Annenberg School of Journalism. And we had 17 Arizonans, most of them from Maricopa County, who participated in a live focus group. You can watch it on YouTube. All of them denied the results of the 2020 election and the 2022 election. They were all convinced that Kari Lake won that election. Absolutely convinced. We spent 2 hours in a focus group that was conducted by Frank Luntz. I was one of the experts. You can take that for what it's worth. David Becker, my co-author, was there. Been in election law space for 25 years. Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State of Georgia, was there. And Bill Gates, no, not that one, the other one you're all aware of, was there. We spent 2 hours going round and round on this. Again, you can watch it on YouTube. We didn't change a single mind in 2 hours. What does that tell you, and what do you feel your obligations as governor are in this space? To a person, they told us they love America, they love Arizona, they're not hostile, they're not violent, but they don't believe it.
Yeah.
Is there anything more you can do, anything more that local election officials should do, or do you just have to wait this out?
So it's not just about my election and believing if I won or Kari Lake won or Donald Trump won or Joe Biden won, but Arizona has been ground zero for this election denial movement since the 2020 election. And what I can say is that while these folks might be the majority of the registered Republican voters, they are not the majority of Arizonans. And I was elected by a coalition of Democrats, Independents, and Republicans who want people to focus on the problems and get to work solving them. And that's what we're doing. And I've answered this question for the last 2.5 years about how do you change their minds? I don't know that we can. As long as the people they look to as leaders continue to purposefully mislead them and feed them these lies for their own personal and political gain, they're gonna believe that. I'm gonna keep telling the truth. I'm gonna do what I can to do that. But I can't make them believe me if they're bought into all these lies about how I stole the election from Donald Trump and Kari Lake and as the Secretary of State. But that's not going to stop me from doing what I was elected to do and getting to work with people across the political aisle and solve problems.
Mm-hmm. I will tell you that 2 hours gave me a very profound sense that this is much harder than I thought it was, that it is very deeply ingrained. And at one point in the conversation, one of the focus group participants said he voted for and was very happy with Andy Biggs. So the question then arose, do you believe he was elected legitimately? The gentleman paused and he said, I'm not sure. Okay, somebody he admires, somebody he respects, someone he thinks is a good advocate for his point of view. And when push came to shove, he's like, well, I'm not even sure about that. It felt to me in the moment and subsequently like a complete pulling away, not just from a specific election, but from the general process itself. I found that worrisome. Do you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that when you phrase it like that to people and they actually have to think about it, maybe that's kind of what it takes. But I mean,
because we were trying to get into that, like, is that election okay and the other ones aren't?
Yeah.
But he's like, no, I'm not sure anymore about anything.
Yeah, and if there is this big conspiracy to, rig all these elections, why did the biggest election deniers get elected? Like Wendy Rogers in our state Senate, who now heads up the Senate Elections Committee. I mean, she, from day one that she got into the legislature, she was claiming the 2020 election was illegitimate, and yet she was elected in that same election. It makes no sense. It doesn't make sense.
I want to shift our attention a little bit to a persistent issue in a place like Arizona, as it is in my home state of California, but one that always seems to get dropped off, and I'm not going to drop it off: the future of water and water rights. It's fundamental to everything in the West. First of all, kind of the meta question: how helpful has the incredibly rainy winter been? What are you hearing? What is the water department telling you about the general immediate situation? Then I've got some very specific questions after that.
Yeah, so I mean, we're in a crisis. There's no denying that we're in a crisis with our water, and it is not a new crisis. It's certainly one that not enough attention has been paid to. I think we've really kicked the can down the road, and we're not going to do that anymore. We're having to face some really hard truths. As part of my State of the State address, I released a previously unreleased report that shows how portions of the West Valley have been over-allocated by 15%. And so, that has implications for projects that have gotten assured water supply certificates. But I talked to the leaders in those communities before we released the report, and they said this gives us what we need to know what we're facing. That's not going to be the last report like that comes out. We're dealing with shortages in the Colorado River, and we've had to really push to come to the table with the other lower basin states. I feel like those talks are going really well. And
has the rainy winter given a reprieve on that at all?
I wouldn't say reprieve. It's been good for us, but what it's going to do, and the issues of water, drought, climate change, these are all intertwined. It's creating more fuel, creating more vegetation that's going to turn into fuel. And so when we have a hotter, drier summer, it's going to turn into more wildfires and more problems that way. So but right now, not the Colorado River system, but the Verde River system is over capacity. That's really good for us. My fear is that it creates a perception that, we had a lot of water, drought's over. It is not over. And we're going to continue in this kind of cycle.
36% comes from the Colorado River for Arizona, if I have my numbers correctly. Most of your consumption in the state, 75-80% agriculture, a $23 billion industry in Arizona.
Yep.
What's the future of cotton and alfalfa growing in Arizona?
Well, I think we need to have some difficult conversations about what kind of crops we should be growing in a desert, and water-intensive crops like cotton and alfalfa might not be the right answer. But we're also working with the agriculture industry on innovative ways to irrigate, conserve water. The Yuma folks have been real leaders on that, and can really create a roadmap for the rest of the farmers in the state. We've kicked the can down the road because these are hard conversations and nobody wants to have them, but we have to have them.
What makes them so hard?
Because if you're a farmer that grows alfalfa, do you want to be told you can't keep growing that? No. So.
And is there a historical Native American dimension to the cotton growing? I read in a couple of articles that said cotton growing in Arizona is a very long established, and 60% of people who grow cotton in Arizona, Native Americans. Is that true?
That is not something I knew before.
Okay, might be true. I didn't know if that came up in the conversations, if that made them hard, if there was a sort of legacy dimension to this that makes the conversations even more difficult.
No, I think that our Native American communities are some of the most adaptable anywhere, and I think they could shift their agriculture if they needed to.
And you talked about the hard conversations. They go down from your office statewide, but they also go up to the federal government. How are they going?
I think really well.
You probably exempt Governor Newsom from that praise.
Here's the thing is that we got him to the table, and those conversations are going better than they were before, and so I'm optimistic.
That what will happen?
That we will have a unified front when it comes to the Tier 2 restrictions from Bureau of Reclamation, and that there'll be agreement on how those cuts are shared rather than falling all on Arizona like they did last time.
In a post-Dobbs America, how do you look at the issue of abortion in Arizona and nationally? What do you think this country needs? What will Arizona have?
Well, I think it's really unfortunate that we did not provide protection outside of the Supreme Court decision before now, because now we're without protection in a lot of states. There should be federal protection for abortion. I don't want to say codify Roe because there's other things that need to happen, but in Arizona we're under a 15-week ban with the threat of a full ban that's still in courts. And so what I'd like to see for Arizona is a repeal of that full territorial era ban, and then movement towards less restrictive ban than 15 weeks, which just in so many circumstances doesn't allow pregnant people the health care that they need. Quite honestly, abortion is a conversation between a woman and her doctor, and there are times where there's not any restriction that is going to fit the specific situation that someone's in, that many of us will never know the circumstances or understand the circumstances of someone having to make that decision about a late-term termination. And certainly a 15-week ban doesn't allow for that kind of situation. So I will say that folks in Arizona are energized about this issue. It motivated people to vote. We had a lot of turnout that was based on the Dobbs decision, and the potential restrictions were under the real restrictions were under in Arizona.
As a governor, how did you evaluate that 3 or 4 week period where a federal court in West Texas, in Amarillo, issued an order about mifepristone, a Washington court issued an order, the Fifth Circuit jumped in, the Supreme Court, that created a tremendous volatility and tremendous unease. How did you look and see all that? What do you hope as a governor emerges from that?
Well, I think beyond the specifics of mifepristone and its legality and the court being able to override science and the FDA, that's
and an FDA approval process, not just for that, but for so many other.
Yeah, I mean, that is setting a precedent I don't think we want. I don't think we want courts to be able to overrule the FDA on things they don't have any idea about, because then
Did that send a shiver through your spine?
Yeah, I mean, we'll start seeing, emergency use authorization vaccines in a pandemic that the courts can say, oh no, we can't, the FDA approval isn't valid. And that's, we don't need to go there. So, and, in terms of mifepristone, it's still legal in Arizona, so.
Mm-hmm. Lastly, on education, there is a drive in many trifecta Republican states, meaning Republican governors and Republican legislatures, to eliminate or to very much restrict any conversations about gender-affirming language, or in some cases, language about homosexuality or anything like that, and to crack down, that's the terminology, on CRT. Evaluate.
Well, I've already had the opportunity to veto a bill that bans CRT, which is not something we even do in Arizona. But I can tell you in my conversations on the campaign trail and now as governor, the issues that folks are concerned about when they look at their kids' education, it is not these kinds of things. It is having qualified teachers in their kids' classroom, having access to high-quality public education, because we are draining resources with our universal voucher expansion in Arizona. Those are the concerns that they have and the problems I believe they sent me to the governor's office to solve, not, policing what teachers say in classrooms.
Vouchers are not a way to improve public education.
No, they are draining resources. Many budget analysts have looked at our program and said it's going to bankrupt the state. We had an alt fuels program that was passed in the early 2000s, and it was quickly repealed because it was going to bankrupt the state, and folks are calling this alt fuels 2.0.
We're here in Sedona, a place favored very much by Senator McCain. I knew Senator McCain very well, didn't cover his campaigns, but I covered him a lot on Capitol Hill. What do you think he would say about the Republican Party as it currently exists in Arizona?
He was censured by the Republican Party here in Arizona, unfortunately, and I think that he would continue to be the maverick that he was and stand up for the right things and not worry about what the party said about him. Certainly, I think he would not support where the party is today.
Last question. I'm going to quote from today's edition of The Economist. On May 6th in London, a man will be given a hat. How psyched up are you about the coronation of King Charles III?
I'm glad you said King Charles because I didn't know what you were talking about. That is how I feel about that.
That's how the Economist treats a huge story in London. Round of applause for Governor Katie Holmes. Governor, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.